Victor, let's talk about the misconnect with today's generation with the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how we as the God's people are oftentimes missing it when it comes to reaching this generation.
Well, you know what? I think that's true. There's so many good people who are trying so hard in the church, but a lot of them are few and far between. And because the family unit is so messed up, most people and pastors, and they're just trying to work to keep something together. And then, as far as families, and all of a sudden the kids who really are bad and need so much help, they get left behind. And the next statement I'm going to say will prove my point to your listeners. Did you know that over 2 million juvenile arrests happened in the U.S. last year? See? And there are over 1,500 youth facilities for security for kids. And tonight 100,000 kids would be locked up. And these are kids that a lot of people don't even know exist, even in your own town. But these kids have to go somewhere. And God loves them. Christ died for them. And they deserve at least to hear the message of the gospel and have hope in their life.
What are you, as you travel, to different cities, what are you hearing? What seems to be the main thing that stands out to you when you visit these different facilities, when you hear the stories? And I know sometimes they're very similar.
Yeah. Standardly, when I hear from the kids, I hear an absent father, or a father who's not taking responsibility, or a dad who was abusive, and you know what? It does rest so much on the father. A kid not getting a blessing from a father, not seeing anything modeled for him. That's how it happened in our family. The cycle of just absentee fathers. My dad was raised in a boys' home for a short time, and his father ended up being in a mental hospital. You see, and the cycle continued. He wasn't there for me. He didn't claim me as his child. And it wasn't later into life did he take full responsibility for him being my dad.
And that was also the road that led you to salvation. You're, reconnecting with your father.
Absolutely. My spin cycle ended when I was in the Marine Corps. And I got a letter from my biological dad, who the last time I heard of him, he was a practicing warlock. So the chances of him coming into my life as a young man were, astronomically low. But he did through a letter, and he basically took responsibility, and he was saying he was sorry for not being there for me. But he said something had happened to him. He said that he had given his life to Jesus Christ. And that made me go, what? This is insane. How could this be? And he invited me to come visit him. And I did, and it was awkward, didn't really know him, and, he said, would you like to go to church with me? And I was like, no. He said, well, I've got some other guys who are tough guys, because that's what I respected, and call them knuckle draggers, guys who like to fight. And he said, they're coming to church with me. And I said, well, I'll go. And when I went, I heard the gospel message that God loved me. And it was really, I just thought, man, and I was touched, and that's when I surrendered my life to Christ. And it was because of a father who came back into my life.
How long after that time that you reconnected with your dad? Soon after that, he had a terminal illness.
Well, actually, he didn't. There was a stepfather who did the majority of the abuse in my life as a child between 3.5 and 7. It was severe. And this stepfather, my mother was caught in a cycle of marrying men who were actually, she was trying to correct stuff that happened to her as a kid by trying to marry messed up guys and fix it, and it just doesn't work.
It sounds like the sin's just a cycle. It's like a revolving door, from the generations.
It is.
And until Christ really can get a hold of a life and change it.
Right. I know this, that the blood of Jesus Christ is stronger than any blood of man, and he's able to do. But I had these stepfathers come into my life, and the first one was a real abusive one, and he would actually even torture using techniques. He was in counterintelligence in the military and fought in a war, and he was driven by evil. And I had everything from being tied to a bed to electrocution to being dunked in the tub unconscious. It was just sick stuff. But that's having a gun put to my head, and all of that. And there's more, but you know what? I don't want to glorify the enemy's work, but talk about the redemptive value, and that's what you alluded to. I was able to forgive this man later in my life.
And that is due to the transforming power of Jesus Christ.
Only. And
I mean, because statistically speaking,
Yeah.
you know, from a psychological point of view,
Yeah.
you should be institutionalized somewhere,
Yep.
or you know, in prison, living a life of crime,
Yep.
or maybe a drug addict. I mean, we see this often happen,
Right.
you know, and we look. What is the cure for the lives that have been destroyed by this type of abuse? And again, we have to go back to Jesus Christ.
Yes. And with that said, I mean, there may be people listening right now, because 1 out of 3 girls will be sexually assaulted before she's 18, and 1 out of 5 boys. That's kind of the statistics. And, you know, my abuse didn't just come from one person, because I was a victim. It came from several. When I was 5 years old, I was caught by a guy out in the woods in Mississippi and taken, and he tried to abuse me and then tried to kill me by locking me in a commercial cooler, hoping that I would die so that I wouldn't tell anybody. And my family found me. I'd been in there for 7 hours. I was unconscious. And when I was able to communicate to them what had happened as a little kid, they found the guy, beat him, and they hung him from behind a tree from my mammal's house. So when you talk about the abuse and statistic, yes. And what I want to say to the person listening is, it's not like I didn't get any wounds or scars from this emotionally. I had a lot of trouble. I started doing drugs in the 6th grade. I tell people I did drugs not to be cool, but to try to erase and cover up
The pain.
And it was my way to self-medicate. But the anger, you know, but I ended up eventually, because of the background. Let me just run through real quick to give a synopsis. You know, my next stepfather, that stepfather who abused me, ended up in prison. And he was importing drugs from out of the country. He got caught in prison. He made the NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. And then he escaped from prison. And that's a whole different deal. But he eventually turned himself in after he was on the lam and did his time. And I'll come back to him. But the next one, and another stepfather that I found out after living with him for several years. And we got an argument. I stood up against him, and he said, "You want to do this?" And I'm like, "I don't care." I was 15 years old, I believe. And he opened up a briefcase underneath his bed, and I thought, what the heck? And he laid out these newspaper clippings, and he said, "You better read this before you get in my face again." And it was an article about him, how he had gone into a bar. He was a biker years earlier, got in a fight, pulled out a gun, shot 2 people and killed one of them. And then he went to prison in Chino. And I'd never known that. So my first response was like, "Mom, you married a murderer? You got to be kidding me." And he just let me know, if you ever come at me, I'm going to treat you like a man.
Victor, God has blessed you with your wife, Eileen.
Yes.
And you have 5 sons.
I have 5 children. I have 2 boys, 3 girls. I've been married
Okay.
21 years to one woman. I've never been cheated on. She's never cheated on me. That's a miracle just in this day and age. I don't care if you come from a perfect background. We've had perfect fidelity because, one, we kept our relationship pure. We were both new Christians, but we decided to keep our relationship pure, and we didn't have any sexual activity before we were married because we were both in the world, and we said, well, we've done it the world's way. Why don't we do this the way God has intended? And you know what? He is blessed, and he's honored his word. His word is true when it comes time for that.
How has all of what has happened in your life, you know, we look at the bad things that have happened, the
Yeah.
abuse, and of course the great thing of Christ's saving power and the new man that you are today.
Yeah.
How has that impacted you to be the father to your family?
Well, it's, I was scared when I became a dad because I didn't know how to be one. I didn't have one modeled for me, and worse, I had bad things happen. And I remember doing pretty good, and then, one time I lost my temper with actually my son Shiloh, who's here in the studio with us. And he was just a little toddler, but I picked him up and threw him across the room. And I aimed him toward the bed, and he hit the bed and bounced, and it didn't hurt him, but it scared him. It scared me. And that's when I told my wife, I said, "Oh my gosh, I don't know where that came from." And it was that transference. And, I was modeling what I'd seen. And I had to, at that point, because I just had young babies, I said, "God, I need help. I don't know what's going on." And, I tell people, I eventually I was in a psychiatric care. I had 42 visits to psychiatrists in a year, 123 with a trauma specialist who works with kids who were abused. And it was my diligence and perseverance to say, I want to get better. I want to have an increased capacity to think right, to believe the truth about what God says about me and how I can be as a man, a husband, and a parent. And it was the truth that really set me free.